we get going, but I'm sure you won't mind the other person coming into the room.
That's why I decided to stand over this side.
Yeah, all right. So speaker today is Shane Greenup, and his identity and origins are so diverse that I'm not even going to attempt to introduce him, but he promises that he will lay it all out for us. So it's great to have you here.
Thanks.
Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Yeah, that's in the right spot. Yeah, really happy to be here and glad to be taking part of this series. So, as everyone knows, there's no news here. Fake news has become like a massive thing lately. Lots of time, lots of resources, lots of money being thrown at this issue. Omidyar made a $100 million fund. Facebook launches $14 million collaborative news literacy project. Google in Europe, 21 million euros each year, roughly, going to different news organisations to work on the various problems of journalism, more than just fake news, but because of, late last year, Trump, Brexit, fake news is getting most of the attention right now. So it's a huge thing. Lots of people are acting on it and looking at it for the first time ever, is what I'm finding. I was at a conference in Montreal recently talking to Craig Silverman, and he's sort of like the old guy in the fake news space because he's been working on it for 5 years. And like, it's sort of a funny thing watching all these people come in and go, oh wow, this is a big problem. But of course, if you think about it, propagand's been around forever, misinformation's been around forever, mistaken beliefs. This is not new in any way, but something's changed. So, what I want to do in this talk, I've broken down into 4 main sections, just to sort of keep you up to where I'm up to. But before I go into the main talk, I will give my background a little bit, because I've realised recently that I have a unique background. So saying all these people that are coming at it fresh for the first time are coming at it from an academic background, or a journalist background, or a technology background, but usually sort of from one angle. I studied just undergrad molecular biology and philosophy and history and philosophy of science. So I spent a bit of time, how do we know things, how do we discover information, and then immediately did nothing to do with any of them and became a web entrepreneur and made websites. So I've spent the last 10 years doing internet marketing, product management, design, these sorts of things. When I say design, not like visual design, as you can see by my slides, I'm not very artistic, but how things work. I live and breathe the internet in a way that few people do. It's a little bit worrying probably, but I love it. So with that background in mind, I want to look at what everyone is doing about fake news and why every single person that I see working on these things is doing it wrong. And at the end, either you can tell me why I'm wrong, or we'll see how we go. So, I'm going to break this section up into 2 things, because I haven't talked about this one previously in my presentations. I added all this yesterday, but I've realised that this is a crucial part, responding on the wrong level. So, easiest way to think of this is bringing a knife to a gunfight, alright? Knives, if you're going to fight to the death, knives kill people. It's a good thing, it works. I'm not saying that knives don't work for that purpose, but if someone's got a gun, you lose, okay? The gunfight that we're dealing with here is the internet. And if you think about what the internet is, it is basically the sum net of all human knowledge ever, accessible to the entire world population. Not everyone's on it and all that sort of stuff, but that's what we're trending towards. All human knowledge ever, all people, and all people adding to all knowledge. This is a new thing, right? Like, obviously the internet's only 20 or 30 years old, but this is what's changed in the lay of the landscape. And never forget that, because one of the things that people often come up with is like, how do we deal with the problem of fake news? They're saying we need better education. We need to teach people media literacy. We need to teach critical thinking. So why don't we go into schools and start doing better curriculum around this? Like I said, the gun to the knife fight. Knife fights work. Education works, but it's the wrong level. If you go in and try and teach these kids media literacy or critical thinking, you'll impact their lives and you make their lives better. But at the end of the day, you're impacting a tiny fraction of the world population at best. You need to train the teachers how to do this. You need to get the funding for the teachers. You need to actually know what you're doing and make sure it works. How do you teach critical thinking? That's hard. You then need to implement it in a school, in a state, in a country, across the world, this approach will not solve the fundamental problem of misinformation on the web because it's the wrong level. Education's great, all for it. People should go out and do that, but it won't solve the problem that we're talking about, because what's changed is this, the internet. Misinformation's always existed. Never been as big a problem as it is now. So, internet. Here's another example of working on the wrong level. Lots of people are saying, what we need is better quality journalism. We need more high quality outlets. We need more money in journalism so that we can afford to pay the journalists. This is the problem. So if you don't know what Wiki Tribune is, the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, started creating it. Oh wait, so it's a bit hard to see now because there's all this fake news over the top of it, but it's still there. Like, it's high quality journalism, and Jimmy Wales is doing a great job with it, and maybe it's going to be amazing and perfect, but it doesn't solve the fact that thousands of dollars spent to write a good quality article, hours spent researching it, to publish it on a website, doesn't stop any of this from existing. It doesn't stop that someone spent 5 minutes saying, hey, Pope Francis endorses Donald Trump. Put it on Facebook, people go, that sounds good, share. I sort of, I almost think this could be like a law of every action, equal and opposite reaction. For every high quality, good website, there is an equal and opposite piece of crap website telling you how this website's wrong. So if any of you don't know about Conservapedia, it's the conservative version of Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is a politically left-leaning online wiki-based encyclopedia. They've got articles about how the Earth's 6,000 years old and all that sort of stuff. So you go and create a good source of information that has the truth as best we can approximate it, and you will immediately get someone going, no, that's wrong. I'm going to make a better website that is correct, because we have biases, and people will keep acting them out. And so to demonstrate this with some research, this is done by Craig Silverman. During the critical months of the election last year, the 20 top performing false election stories from hoax sites and hyperpartisan blogs generated 8.7 million shares, reactions and comments on Facebook. Within the same time period, the 20 best performing election stories from 19 major news websites generated a total of 7.3 million shares, reactions and comments on Facebook. The nonsense fake news at websites that no one's ever heard of, that take minutes to write because they're made up, got more vision on Facebook than the top 20 stories from the mainstream news websites that everyone knows the brand names of, everyone recognises, everyone knows is reliable to their own persuasion. Less coverage. So making better quality journalism and more of it isn't going to solve the problem, because it's acting on the wrong level. You have to address how people access the information, which is the internet, the access point. So going back to this is the level. When we decide to educate the children, we get to affect maybe that many of the people. When we decide to create high quality journalism, we make little beacons of light and hope on the web. We can go there and get good quality information, but it does nothing for everything else. It does nothing to stop all of these people that aren't educated from still accessing all of the nonsense and deciding that they've discovered the truth, that Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump or whatever. So if it isn't obvious, this is where we need to act. At the interface between people and the internet. It's the internet itself and how people access it. Well, so it's the internet where we need to act, but it's the access point that ends up being the choke point that you can act upon. So at the moment, the reality is that consists of your browser, or when most people are looking, Google and Facebook, or Twitter, or Reddit, or whatever. Like, there's lots of things, but Google owns the monopoly of search. How you go, what information do I want that, get it. Facebook owns a monopoly of what do my social network think and how do I get information from that. All right? They own that at the moment, so that's the obvious place to act. That can change, but So now that we've identified what the right level to act on is, how do we act on it? Deciding what is and is not true is the wrong way to do it. So, well, rather than that, how should we handle misinformation online? Hands up everyone that thinks we should create a central authority that declares the truth dogmatically. Is this a good idea? We have to access all humans to all information, and we're going to put someone there that decides, no, that's not true, that's good, that's wrong. No one wants that. Who thinks we should improve critical thinking and help the public understand complex issues? All right, everyone knows that we want to improve critical thinking so that people can make the right decisions themselves. All know that. So why is everyone doing the opposite? Google, fighting fake news. Google's new fact-check tool attempts to combat global issues. The new tool red flags stories its algorithm determines may contain misleading information. Facebook has started flagging stories based on work from the Point of Fact-Checking Network. Love the Point of Fact-Checking Network. I agree with them. I think they're doing the right thing. But they've got the same problem. I'll get to that in a second anyway. This one is from a hackathon. So back when everyone was putting pressure on Google and Facebook to fight fake news, but nothing had been done yet, there's some guys at a university went, we can do this, and they created a plugin that adds a little tag in the corner that says whether the story is verified or not. They're trying to adjudicate what is true and false and tell everyone. Everyone's approaching it this way. So, first obvious question is, who would you trust with this power? We have the internet, all the knowledge up here, and you down here trying to access it. You've got Google and Facebook in the middle here, deciding for you, no, that's not good, and just getting rid of it. Is that the internet that we want? Remembering again, all information forever, all people. And Facebook and Google deciding for us? No one really wants that, I don't think. President of the United States deciding for us? Definitely not. The UN, like who is it that you could administer that power to? This could also go a different way, right? So if Facebook and Google do start deciding to implement these systems and deciding for us, we'll start getting this happening more and more. This has already happened. Gab, the alt-right's very own Twitter, these people decided that Facebook was really social media for lefties and they didn't like it. It was censoring people and whatever. So they went and created their own website, which, maybe it's social media for Nazis. Because, they don't like using politically correct terms, so alt-right's politically correct for Nazis. So this is already happening. What's next? Maybe social media for hippies, people that don't want to vaccinate but think that, Donald Trump's bad, there are so many different ideological bubbles that we can fit into, but the difference between the ideological divisions that we currently have, where you choose Fox News or The Guardian or those sorts of divisions, are that they are different media outlets. They have their target audience, and they know it, and that appeals to you or it doesn't. Facebook and Google are attempting to be social media for everyone. They're a platform that accesses other people's information. And so when we start getting these divides, this is when we'll see true echo chambers. Because when you're in Facebook and a tenth of the world's population are over in Gab and they're talking about this conspiracy theory or this idea or another, you will never see it. At the moment on Facebook, you have some element of just the people you choose, but you still see your crazy uncle's posts or your high school friend that you haven't spoken to for 20 years posting their racist thing or whatever. You still see it. It's there because you're on the same platform. You're in the same community. But when we start actually dividing the communities and never seeing each other, that's terrifying because this is global and yet we still have to live and work with each other. So we can be in the same community as people that use Gab and this other one and this other one and never experience their ideas, but we still have to work together, vote together, decide things together, get along together. And when each of these things demonizes the other people as the worst humanity's ever created, and then we go and talk to them, we find out, oh, you're a Gab user? Talk about violence coming out of this sort of stuff. So, just to put it in context, the closest we've ever had to this in the past, before the internet changed everything, was, the Cold War, where you had America and Russia. And if you lived in America, you'd only have, the American sort of source of information telling you how the Russians are evil and they're communists and they're going to destroy us and everything. And in Russia, they'd be getting exactly the same story about America. And that was a terrible situation. But at least they were separated by a continent. So now we're going to end up with exactly the same situation, but within our communities, within our societies. So that's one scenario that actually concerns me a great deal. The next major problem, how do we even guarantee accuracy? So I mentioned before, Facebook partnered with the Point of Fact-Checking Network. Facebook's smart enough, they don't want to be responsible for deciding true or false, so they outsource it to someone else, which is great. Well, we'll get to that. The obvious criticisms of that is they've outsourced it to the Point of Fact-Checking Network, which is a network of fact-checking websites, which is a website that makes money through ad revenue to hire journalists to do research to identify what's true or false. At the end of the day, it's still a person that's doing the work and deciding true or false. Do we trust that person? Facebook, of course, tries to go with at least 2 sources have decided that. So they're trying to mitigate it as much as possible. But there's so many flaws with biases. The second Facebook did this, all the alt-right people started going, Snopes is a biased left source, we can't trust PolitiFact. So it's still creating that same division problem. But this came out just in the last week, assessing the effect of disputed warnings and source salience and perceptions of fake news accuracy, but easier reading from Politico. Tagging fake news on Facebook doesn't work. This bit. The existence of flags on some, but not all, false stories made Trump supporters and young people more likely to believe any story that was not flagged. So unless it gets everything, people just go, oh, it's not flagged, must be true. Humans are naturally lazy. Intellectually lazy. We don't like to think. This is why we have a problem. Sounds good, share it. Oh look, they're getting rid of the bad stuff, I can share everything that's not bad. It's predictable. Something to say about that as well. Oh yeah, so even though they've partnered with the Point of Fact-Checking Network, no one knows what Facebook uses to decide what they will cross-reference to the Point of Fact-Checking Network and what they won't. Because the fact-checking networks don't correlate their fact checks to the articles that are fact-checked or whatever, right? So Facebook still has to decide what they're going to even research from their side before they flag it. So how much fake news do they tag in the first place? Will that creep with time? Will they start getting more and more stuff and start move from fake news, whatever that is, no one can define it, to anti-vaccine stuff is something that should be tagged, flagged. That's not true. Climate change? Ooh, now we're dividing the population 50-50 because a lot of people don't believe in climate change. So we then go further and further and further. Start talking about religions. They can't all be right. So, yeah, scope creep with that. Google's fact-checking bot. Now, Google hasn't implemented this yet. They have implemented something, though, which they're starting to punish conspiratorial websites. Things that don't align with mainstream media, they are punishing in their Google search ranks. That's kind of terrifying in itself. One thing they're talking about doing is doing it with a more machine learning AI sort of thing, looking at their knowledge vault, which attempts to standardize agreed facts across the website and go, well, enough people agree on this, so it's probably approximation of truth. It's probably somewhat better, maybe, but of course there's plenty of other flaws in it, I don't know, I won't spend too much time on it. There's plenty of flaws with every one of these approaches, and suffers from the same things as this, things that aren't tagged and decided they're probably true, that intellectual laziness. So is the end goal to get to a perfect and benevolent artificial intelligence that perfectly discerns the truth of all statements? Is this what we're trying to get towards? Imagine that if it was perfectly benevolent and it was right, and we just always only had the truth come to us. That sounds almost ideal, right? Never have misinformation again. It gets with the ultimate thing. The ultimate solution, if we did get there, is still much worse. Because the first question, do we want a central authority to declare the truth? We want this because we know that critical thinking is what we actually want. We want people that can think. And if we have kids growing up in a world where they only ever get told, here's the truth, here's the truth, here's the truth, guaranteed, imagine trying to teach those kids critical thinking. Yes, when will they ever use this in the real world? They will not know what the idea of media literacy is. They will not have any reason to ever doubt anything. They will just believe. We will be training these kids to be passive receivers of dogmatic truth. And that's the worst outcome possible. We need critical thinkers, we need thinkers, we need people that challenge the status quo to make things move forwards. So, all of these approaches, well, it's really just the one basic approach. People adjudicating true and false. Everyone's trying to do it, and it's frustrating because there are so many problems with it at every stage of the process. So, that's my section criticising the solution so far for fake news. Which brings me to my backstory a little. My backstory, which gives you a little bit of context on why I'm here at all. In 2012, someone shared this article on Facebook. At the time, it had a different heading. It said, new study shows vaccinated children suffer. And because it had that new study shows, I'm like, well, that's interesting. Maybe there is a new study that's been done. And I went and looked at it, and the study was just a poll on an anti-vaccine website compared to data. Okay, then this is broken. And I wanted to show the friend that shared this what's wrong with it. I didn't want to just say this is crap. I wanted them to understand. And I also didn't want to spend 2 hours writing, because I'm a terrible writer and it takes me forever. So I went to Google and I tried to find someone who had critiqued this article, because someone had done it. I knew, because I live on the web, I know that if someone has an opinion, someone else will argue with them. It's guaranteed. So I went looking and I couldn't find it, which was annoying because this existed, couldn't find it. This existed, couldn't find it. This came a few months later. But the problem is with all of these articles is they were on different websites. I didn't know which websites they were on. Written by different authors. I didn't know who wrote them. With different headlines. I didn't know what the headline was. Oh, and when you Google the headline of the original article, you get 1,000 copies of the original article. Because it's a blog thing which gets, you know, people go, oh, this is good, I'll just share it and just post on their own blog. So Google is useless at finding critiques, particularly for new articles. So it was really frustrating looking at this going, I know that these critiques exist. I understand why these people don't want to tell you about the critiques, because they're trying to persuade you to their agenda. But surely the people that write the critiques want people looking at this page to know about them. Why isn't there a system where you can just click on a button and get a list of all the critiques? That's all I wanted. I wanted access to the critiques. So we went and built Rebutter, a browser plugin that tells you this page has X number of rebuttals. We built a Twitter reply widget, so when someone tweets something that's in our database, you can hit a button and it generates this reply for you, and you can send it to them. We made, if you type rebutter.com/ in front of any URL, it brings up this frame and tells you about the rebuttals. We made a reply bot in Reddit, so when someone shares something that's in our database, it will reply and say, you may be interested in this critique of that. We did that for 2012, 2013, 2014. Had a good deal of success. We got organisations with relationships with a number of organisations like the James Randi Foundation for Education, JREF, James Randi, whatever, Richard Dawkins Foundation, and a lot of skeptic organisations. 20,000 users, 30,000 rebuttals in the system. But at the end of it, we had to stop working on it because it had no income and whatever, you know. It's not really a business. But what we really learned at the end of it was that two things. One, if people need to install a plugin or remember to type something in, it'll never get the reach it needs. It's going to always just hit its target audience, which is people that care about critical thinking or whatever, which is a tiny subset of the population. But the most important thing that I learned was that the real value of this system was this database that we built. Not the one that we built necessarily, but the idea of it. All it is it says that this URL rebuts that URL. It's so simple. And all we need to do, we crowdsourced the whole thing, so people had to find the rebuttals and submit them. But every single person that's written a rebuttal, except for general ones, typically knows that they're writing it about their target paper. So the idea is simple. Wouldn't it be great if everyone that wrote a rebuttal just sort of goes, okay, then now submit it to the rebuttal database? Done. So what's amazing about this system, though, is the way it plays out. That simple database, just one-to-one connection. This rebuts that, this critiques that. This one page is connected to that one, and it's connected to this one and this one. So identifying that that's common amongst all of these critiques, all of them critique that one page, we've now got a vertical list of critiques for that page. As people access that and then read this, if it's not relevant, they can hit the spam button and go, this isn't a critique, it's not even appropriate. But if they read and go, this is kind of persuading, I like what they're saying, they can just give it an upvote and go, it's good. They're not saying that this is right, though they may think so. What they're saying is that it is a good critique of that. And so the objective here is, everyone that reads these articles, articles fight amongst themselves to get the best critique of the list. So now we have the vertical vote that decides just which to put of this at the top. And then all of these are web pages themselves, so this article can then be critiqued any number of times, and they vote amongst themselves to get the best critique, and again. And then we end up with, from any one of these pages, you're immediately placed into the wider context of that debate and an idealized format of it. Because you go from this, you get the best critique of that page that we know of. And from that, the best critique of that page that we know of, and the best critique of that. We organize, and by the way, Rebutter wasn't making this content. We weren't asking people to write it. Nothing was being done, but just organizing the content that already existed on the web. And we've organized the web so that you get an ideal debate. So,
Can I just ask, maybe you'll get to this, so stop me if you will, but if this is emerging from people rating those rebuttals, then presumably that is susceptible to the same kind of dividing between, you know, pro-vaccination people rating them and other people rating them. So
A little bit.
Yeah.
So, because the rating is purely amongst all these articles which ostensibly agree with one another, ignoring the risk of gaming and people brigading to try and undermine the system, which is one thing that will have to be algorithmically and moderatively controlled, ignoring that, what ends up happening, so this is 16 climate scientists saying no need to think about global warming. So all the people that are writing this are probably pro-climate change people. And so ideally, all of the pro-climate change people will read these and go, this is a really good one. Now this is a really good one. And the pro people will fight amongst themselves to identify their best argument, which is what pro-climate change people want. We want our best argument to be presented to that side. And if the anti-climate change people have any sort of integrity in their intellectual pursuit, they also want the best argument of the other side. Because now you've got the best argument of the pro-climate change, you know what to attack. This is steel-manning an argument, right? Rather than attacking the weakest argument and going, well, that was easy, we win, you go to the strongest argument and you get the best argument you can get from your side. So this is now all ostensibly anti-climate change people, write their articles, fight amongst themselves, identify their best argument, because they want their best argument. So the gaming there is, of course, you know, the anti-climate change people come here and find the worst argument, try and vote it up. And there's a risk of that, but it's really not worth their time because, as I say, yes, they should want the best argument themselves. And it's a lot of effort for a little reward because at the end of the day, it only affects this one article as well. So this is what's beautiful about the system is any effort that you invest to manipulating the system will only impact the list of one page. So you've got to do it across every page all the time. And because the system is so simple and to add the rebuttals in the process, it simultaneously, it's scalable, you know. It will apply to all the pages. So and that will happen easily, but the gaming will have to then act on every page. So it's resistant to that sort of thing naturally. But it will still need some sort of moderation or algorithmic defense. So to tie this together, 21 minutes, not too bad. To tie all this together, everyone's approaching it wrong. We went and built Rebutter to solve a simple problem and sort of slowly realised that it had far wider implications than we ever set up to create. So going back to how everyone goes after the truth. Now, how many people in this room are philosophers or academics of philosophy or studying philosophy?
All of us.
Yeah.
Everyone?
Every single person.
Yes.
Great. Because this is the room, because I've been sort of saying this a bit lately and you're the room to correct me on it. But as far as I can tell, and you know, linguistic limitations, from over 2,000 years of philosophy, one thing that we know for sure is that anyone that claims to know the truth is wrong. Like, we have no way of knowing the truth. And the best that we've ever come up with for finding a way to sort of approximate it or to give us a practical way to understand the way the world works, I've come up that there's sort of two answers to that. And they're both basically the same one anyway. And that's the Socratic method, which is, I don't know, but I can tell you not tell you what's wrong. I don't know, but how do you claim to know what you think you know, right? It's just critiquing someone's beliefs until they realise that they don't really know. And so, so I don't really need to explain the Socratic method to you guys. And of course, the other one is preparing falsification, which is the ideal of science. Whether Kuhn can be completely right, it's not how people actually act it, but still the ideal is there. Is that we come up with a belief, a hypothesis, and we identify ways that we can prove it wrong, and then we go out and we try and prove it wrong. It's through trying to disprove the hypothesis and the theory that we make progress. And again, it never ends up with the truth. It never tells us that we know that there's only black swans. The best we ever do is we go, well, now we know that that's not true. And we get incrementally less wrong with time. So, I don't know if maybe we go to the end and you can all critique whether I'm right on that or not. But this is what the best I've come up with is for approximating. We don't know truth, but we can approximate it by being incrementally less wrong with time. So, no claims of truth. No need to trust anyone with this. Like way back, it was just trust the Bible, trust God. We have this source of knowledge of truth. This process, Socrates' whole point was like, don't trust anyone. How do you I'm going to find the most renowned person that knows about this and find out how he knows it. Oh, it looks like he doesn't. So there's no need to trust anyone on this approach to knowledge. and all emphasis on challenging and attempting to refute claims of knowledge. In other words, consider claims critically. This is critical thinking, right? Discard that which is incorrect and be less wrong. So, going back to this, do we want that? Definitely not. Do we want this? Everyone wants critical thinking. So, if the only method we have of approximating knowledge is to critique information constantly, it's kind of, by doing that in your day-to-day life, you are creating an atmosphere, a culture of critiquing, of critical thinking. So, the Socratic Web. This is, when the fake news thing came about and I saw all this pressure on Facebook and Google to change things, I knew that this would happen. I knew that they'd start fighting fake news by just going, that's wrong, get rid of it. And it happened, and they started posting it, and I knew that these guys, Prison Planet, which is InfoWars, Snopes is a biased far-left outfit's not responsible fact-checker, they feel like Facebook's attacking them now. Like, this was all so predictable. What I wanted to see happen was this. So I've just mocked this up. As I said, I'm not a visual designer. So Facebook will do a much better version of this, but this is what I want them to do. Like, comment, share, critiques. Whether it's there or not, or in that, or I don't care where they do it or how they do it, but this is not obtrusive. It doesn't jump at you, it doesn't tell you that your beliefs are wrong, which is what theirs currently do. You try and share a thing and it goes, no, this is wrong. This just says someone's critiqued it. You click on it, it pops down and gives you a list of the critiques. So, you know, just the same thing that we were doing with Rebuttal, but now they do it directly on their platform. Doesn't divide anyone, doesn't make a claim about truth, they don't adjudicate anything. You can do it in browsers. You may not know, you know, if you click on that, you get a little pop down. If you click on that to bookmark, it's a little pop down. How hard is it to put another little button there with ... or, you know, hopefully a better symbol for critiques, but you click on it and it just gives you a list of all the critiques of the page that you're currently viewing. Google has a little drop down after the URL that cached and similar pages. Cached, similar, critiques. Again, all of these things are non-intrusive, not in your way, not telling you what to think. They're just available. Just reminding you that people disagree with what you're reading. So that's the first prompt. It's like, people disagree with this? I wonder why. And then, if you're interested enough, you go and read it, and then you get to see how people critique it, which is training people. Humans learn best by observation and copying. So if we have a web where every kid grows up and they can always access these critical analysis of everything they read, they don't do it all the time, but occasionally they will. And when they do that, they'll be seeing how to critique things. They will learn critical thinking just by using the web. So, the idea that I'm working on right now is developing a new non-profit organisation called perhaps Ask Socrates. I've got that domain. Willing to change it. Not attached to anything. As you can see, there's no branding. There's nothing done yet. The ideal is it has to be open source and open access. It's for everyone. It is a web good. And it should be a consortium, a collaboration between all the Facebook, Google, and all the web giants. Trustless. There should be at no point, like it's impossible to completely trustless on this, but at no point should people go, well, I don't really trust Shane, because it's not me making the decisions. It's creating a platform that just provides it as transparent. And my current plan is to crowdfund this soon. I'm also talking to blockchain people because we're maybe doing an ICO-based crowdfunding or something, but still figuring out exactly the process. But I've got a long roadmap of how to put it all together. But the idea is we collaborate with all the web giants, the platforms, the access points to the web, and the people that create the fact checks. Though, of course, it's not exclusively for them, but you know they're the ones that do the bulk of the work, so we work with them because we have to get it right for everyone involved. We redesigned this database from scratch because the way it is at the moment, I know that there's no way that Facebook would use the Rebuttal database to just suddenly start putting links on their website. They don't know whether we're reliable or not. They don't know if they're going to get porn or hate speech or whatever. So there needs to be ways for them to feel confident with the data. So that's why it needs to be rebuilt from scratch with collaboration with these guys so that it meets their needs. We rebuilt it from scratch. Facebook now starts querying the database and they put the links on their page. Twitter can do it, Chrome, Mozilla, Microsoft can do it with Bing and Internet Edge, whatever it is now. These guys will have an API so that they can just automatically dump any fact checks they do straight to the database, very little work. There'll be other third parties, like Rebuttal will still exist. There'll be plugins that will use it for various things. It can be used for academic purposes. Once you get this data together, you've got a map of how information flows on the web in an argumentative sense. it is a semantic quality. Rebuts is a semant, perhaps. And you can then scrape those websites and get amazing amounts of data from that. So, making it perfectly open access, academics have field day with the data from this. So, basically, summarising now, what motivates me about this is that it's so practical and so possible and so easy to do. It's technically simple to implement. It's a database with some API calls. It is a completely neutral solution to misinformation. It promotes critical thinking by its nature. And important to point this out, because I do sell it quite strongly maybe, it's not going to solve every problem. It doesn't need to. It needs to do something. It needs to create that first step. Because everyone that's trying to solve the problem is making the situation worse. They're going to create the AI that makes us all stupid. It is a system that just, when you're looking at all human knowledge forever and all of the population, if you make a 1% difference in the way people approach information, are a little bit more critical, the impacts of that are far more profound than if the Australian government tripled their education budget and put philosophy and critical thinking into every primary school and high school. 1% change on the internet and the way that everyone accesses information will have a much more profound effect. So that's the way I look at this is an incremental change that makes us a little bit less wrong as a species. Now, there are three main difficulties I've outlined in this process. The first one's the big one. Now, I don't expect Facebook to go and go, yeah, we'll do it and then implement it. That's a process. But getting them to talk to me in the first place, I've got some contacts at Facebook and Google, but it's really hard to get replies from them. So I'm working on that. This is part of it. I need people to start recognising that I'm serious and this is going to happen. I think this is a necessary part of the web. If we don't have this, then we will have fake news and misinformation and a constantly growing source of negativity on the web. So I need to get them taking this project seriously. And that's, it's a process I'm working on. It's happening. Algorithms to sort the critiques. Raw vote won't be enough in the end. It will be more complicated than that because there will be a gaming thing. People will try and manipulate it the same as people do with Google search results. Google's algorithm started off as backlinks, PageRank, which is a voting system. And then they incrementally make it more and more complex to fight people that were taking advantage of it. It'll be exactly the same for this. It is an iterative process. And how to allow voting from distributed interfaces. When we were Rebutter, we controlled everything. It was easy. People made an account to vote or whatever. When we are a database at the center and Facebook and Google are controlling the interface and Snopes or whatever it's submitting, who votes and how you restrict it is a completely different question. And that needs to be answered, but if everything else happens, that's easy to answer. The point is these three problems, that's all I can identify, are easy compared to making artificial intelligence, machine learning, hiring an army of journalists to fact-checking. Every other approach is infinitely harder and broken. And this doesn't solve the problem, but it addresses it, and it's easy. So that's basically the end. My purpose here, just to hopefully change some minds about the fake news, the way everyone's approaching it. Spread the word. Critiquing our way towards less wrong is the only approach which works. It's what works on the forefront of knowledge with science. But also, now that I'll make a point on this. Now that we've democratized information, we're basically at the Protestant Reformation again. Back in when it was with religion, the Catholic Church was there and it told everyone what to believe. And then the printing press came about and suddenly people could read the Bible and they started disagreeing with it. From the perspective of the Catholic Church, they were all wrong. And they were idiots to go away from the church. But in the end, maybe the Protestant Reformation was really good for Christianity and allowed them to be progressive in ways that the church never would have been. So similarly with science now, for so long we've had the scientists publishing in peer-reviewed journals that was never accessible to the average person. And then journalists have to report it to people. And they just have to believe what the journalists say. And now the web's come about, anyone can access scholarly journals, sometimes illegally, but they can access it. And people are starting to access information. And they're getting it wrong most of the time. But the landscape has changed, and we're sort of having a Protestant Reformation of kinds against science and expertise. Now, as a scientist, it's clear what side I'm on of that fight, but we're not going to win. You're not going to stop people from doing this. So you need to embrace the fact that people are going to start reading information and making it up their own minds, and find a way to help them make up their minds properly. And by that I mean not telling them the truth, not telling them the answer, but teaching them how critiquing things and becoming less wrong with time is the only answer. and you can just build that into the web programmatically. Yeah, so I'm here to find supporters. Thank you.
Good. Well, the floor's open for comments and discussion.
As you were presenting, I thought that I'm not on the same page with you, because I believe really in critical thinking, and I really believe in the importance of critical thinking, especially in education and the long-term impact of it. But I would also say that most importantly, I believe that the best antidote to fake news is actually to build trust towards quality media institutions. And building trust is a process. It's not something that you can, just deliver in, a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, if you are trying to address the issue by, adding rebuttals, and
Yeah.
we don't even know who the authors of these rebuttals are. We don't even know, like, what are the arguments? Like, are they based on evidence? Are they based on, we're not fact checking also what
Yeah.
they're doing. What kind of quality rebuttal are these? And are these journalists? Where are these coming from? And it can actually contribute to more confusion, to more misinformation, to more, more drama.
Yeah.
Really.
It absolutely
So,
can.
yeah.
It can, but it's kind of the nature of it being a simplistic, scalable, replicable system, and it's still necessary because. So what's first? I went back to the slide when you said better quality trust. Trust in journalism.
Yeah.
It's along these lines. Like, this is what Wiki Tribune's trying to do. It's like, let's create journalism that everyone can trust. Wikipedia, everyone can trust that because it's crowdsourced. Like, but still, people will deny it. Who you trust is very different to who a Trump supporter trusts, probably. So trust is an individual thing. Now, so my response to the second half of the question sort of hangs off that, because as much as I agree with you, and I want to be able to say, no, this is the right way to think, this is the right thing to believe, this is the right person to trust, we no longer have that power. So this is really about acknowledging the state of affairs and then dealing with it.
Yeah, but we can't actually just say that quality journalism doesn't matter anymore because, I'm
not saying it doesn't matter, but it's the knife in the
nuke.
nuke.
You started the presentation by saying that quality journalism wasn't, and critical thinking were not, important anymore.
I didn't say that.
Well, you said
I'm saying the whole point is critical
funding,
thinking.
like actually looking for funding towards, better quality journalism was not the issue. So
Yeah, it's
well,
the wrong
I
level.
think it is the issue, because the problem with these big dominant global digital giants, obviously, yes, you mentioned the problem of access with these global digital giants, but then you didn't really address it. So the problem of having these huge gatekeepers that are global, that is the major issue, and the fact that they are becoming gatekeepers even despite our claims of keeping net neutrality in the Western world. But now
you're advocating that that the gatekeepers, so Facebook and Google, need to. What does that occasionally? You're saying that Facebook and Google need to start directing people to the true information? So you're going to the authoritarian control of information again?
Absolutely not. I'm not arguing for that. I'm arguing for the breakup of digital monopolies. So I'm totally against this. But the problem is that you said, yes, we have an issue of access. So, and I agree with you. We have a big issue of access. And actually, the old-style policy making of addressing this was always in Europe, in the Western world, to have public service institutions that would try, to address the issue of access. Now we don't, because Google and the digital monopolies don't have any public obligations towards us. But it's precisely there that we should intervene.
Do you have any sense of what that might even look like, though?
Yes, but if we don't,
because like what you're saying is you want to sort of make lots and lots of points of access, right? So different people will, but like the reason these guys are monopolies is because they do the job really well. Google finds what you're looking for.
Also because since the 80s we've stopped regulating media environments.
Yeah.
So that's the major issue. But it was a clear decision that we made as policymakers. You might agree, you might say that we're powerless, so we don't actually participate in policymakers, but these were decisions. And before then it was very different environment.
But this is also still on the wrong level issue. Because you're thinking country level, like policy. How do you control
absolutely not.
How do you control the policy of the web?
No,
it's the whole world.
we have great, global forums like the World Forum of Information Society, where we do and we can agree on these issues. The European Union, for example, has agreed that we need to protect the right to be forgotten, and has decided, to have a board of, people that are involved in that. So there are policy intervention that we can all agree with, and also, like, we have also an issue that we tend also just to look at the Western world, but
Mundial in Brazil.
Yeah.
The Internet Governance Platform or Forum.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at forum like on the global scale, like the World Forum, they include really like all global stakeholders. I know that it's an important battle and difficult one to win, but at least the European Union has tried to start addressing the issue.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everything they're doing is right, but actually, I don't think that we should just agree that it's impossible to address the issue of global monopolies, global digital monopolies.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't think it's not about saying it's impossible. Mostly, what my angle on this is that most of the the education approach, the journalism approach, this is what everyone's focusing on and everyone's working on. They're hard problems. Getting political agreement on how to implement, more access points to the web, like, what that even looks like is a hard question to answer, let alone then get people to agree on it in a political setting and then implement it. That's really hard. It may be ideal, but it's a big part of this is just sort of dealing with the pragmatic reality of the web. And at the moment, the pragmatic reality is someone creates a bit of technology and implements it and it works, and then it goes runaway viral because you've got the entire population of the planet able to decide what works for them, and they just decide. So this solution is that same sort of thing, which is we can just build this and it'll work. The only problem is getting Facebook and Google and the big people to eventually buy into it. But trying to get, we need to do more research. Academic research is so slow that by the time we've decided that Facebook's a bad thing for the population, they've been around 20 years. Like, getting political change is so slow. By the time you get people to agree, because they can't agree because we've got the research, technology is too fast for our society.
Let's go to another question. John.
You've stepped into a hot bath here, I think. And,
Cool. It's about time.
Thank you very much for being so brave. I think it's very interesting. I have to confess that I'm a pre-Socratic, and all that I say is going to be in that tone. A couple of remarks about this type of discussion. I think we've all sat through contributions on what can be done about fake news and post-truth and so on in fields like journalism and communications. And one common feature of so much of this discussion, and I think it's a weakness in what you're saying, is the presumption that actually things are going to the dogs, that our times are worse than has ever been. And I think that the amnesia in this discussion, it's worth paying attention to it. It's true that you want to revive Socrates, that's good. I'll have a thing to say about that in a minute. But when you look at the late medieval period in Europe, the period of Black Death, when a third of the population dies, it's a world before the printing press, it's a world of the church and morality, but it's also a world of rumours, much worse than our times. Or if you look at late 1920s Mussolini's Italy, where radio and early television is used as the new means of communication. Fakeness, propaganda and so on are rampant. So it's just a comment to say that, having some sense of the historicity of all of this is pretty important, and I think those who want mechanical solutions to this, and I think you're in that group, need to pay attention to that. The second remark, which is equally tough, is that there's a lot of Orientalism in all of these discussions. You offered us a vote. Are you in favour of, it's all well, are you in favour of the central authority that decides everything for us? This is not the option. The China model of cyber sovereignty is much more sophisticated. There are filters, there are platforms, there is, in the cyber sovereignty model, a lot of outright censorship, firewalling and so on. But Baidu and Youku and WeChat are not describable in the terms that you offered us as an alternative. It's actually a very complicated model and much more sophisticated. and a lot of people know very little about it and should pay attention to that, because that is a serious alternative. And it's practiced in Iran and it's practiced in Qatar. There are growing numbers of cases. These are pedantic points. But I think the third thing is that I've noticed that in so many of these discussions about fake news and mechanical solutions, algorithmic solutions to them, I find that the depoliticization, almost the anti-politics of it all, is very striking. I'm caricaturing, of course, I'm troping, of course, but you know, I think what you're looking for, understandably, in this morass of confusion about what's true and what's not and so on, you want a mechanical solution. You're trying to find an set of algorithms that can launch a platform, an app, and so on. It has coded into it the ideal. You say it's Popper, and Popper, by the way, is not Socrates. We should have that discussion. Socrates feeds Plato, truth. Popper also is committed to that, but it's a different understanding. But you, built into what you want to say, is this idea that we can get closer to it, out there. We can measure, you know, we can find a way and metrics of deciding that we've got it, we've finally grasped it. And I think that that the loss of politics in these attempts to present solutions to fake news is very striking. I want to ask you in a moment what you mean by critical thinking, but you know, there's no room very often in the discussions for interpretation. There's no room for the view that truth has many faces. Kafka, sometimes you say it, but you know, you really want to be a Popperian or a Socrates. There's no room in these solutions for judgment. It's a very important term for when people decide in a context, you know, how to behave, how to act when they're confronted with conflicting information. There's no category.
I'm going to start forgetting your first question soon.
There's no category of public life in this, and there's no politics in it. And it seems to me that that's a very basic weakness.
I actually disagree with that last point.
One last remark. I think that it would be good. It would be good to have a look at, you know, this is not a creation ex nihilo. It would be good to have a look at those platforms that are doing what you're advocating.
No one is.
The Intercept, the Conversation.
It's not the same though.
Well, they claim to be doing the same. The China Digital Times, the New York Times, you know, it could go on to correspondent.
It's just a way of managing their editorial process, though. It's very different to providing the entire sum of humanity the choice to identify what is the best.
Okay, maybe to put it simply, the question is, what do you mean by critical thinking?
Yeah, well,
what do you mean to say?
Well, I am using it just as like an umbrella term, so I don't have a strict meaning of it, because it's not. I think that it helps teach critical thinking, whatever that means, because like there are lots of different definitions, and everyone struggles to define it, and someone can define it one way, and then someone else will disagree. So I'm not concerned about that. The reason I refer to it critical,
central to your whole.
But it's not. What's central is that one critiques another. That's what's central. What I'm saying is the consequences of that are, I think, an education in critical thinking by virtue of reading critiques, by virtue of reading critical analysis, by virtue of reading debunkings and fact checks. It's just merely the act of throwing yourself into the culture of critique. I don't need to define critical thinking. I think that environment is what I'm talking about.
Used to be called public controversy in public life.
So, but this is what so why I said before I disagree quite strongly is you're saying there's no politics in that. This is the only system that does that. All I'm saying is we just organise information to get the best critique. The rest is up to you. Fight about it. This is politics. This is a courtroom. This is question time. This is the internet organised to allow the population of the planet to decide for themselves.
Yeah, so, I mean, I see the value of this, and I think a lot of what you're saying and doing does respond to some of the critiques that John has. I mean, the difference between this sort of, you know, universal, yes, this is valid or not, and replacing that with, you know, a series of options for people to look at. You know, the sort of the rebuttals, that whole idea of, you know, here's this idea out there, and instead of just saying yes or no, here are other ways to think about it. And I think it gets the multiplicity of truth, and I think it gets at people judging for themselves. So I'd like that as an addition to the tools that we have. The problem is that you're assuming, I mean, the problem for me is that you're assuming people give a shit about critical thought and not just bullshit. And, you know, a lot of politics is just about bullshit. And, you know, climate deniers couldn't care less about making a better argument against a scientist. They want to create more bullshit arguments that they know people will waste their time, you know, spending on these kinds of rebuttals. So there's a whole population out there that won't benefit at all, won't participate at all. That is a major part of the problem that we have with this adoption and spread of post-truth.
So there's sort of two parts to that in the end. This in no way presumes that everyone cares about everything all the time. In fact, that's its very nature, is it's just make it available. And because the reality is like, you know, I live out in suburbia and I grew up in a working class family. I know how much the average person doesn't give a shit about any of this. Politics, science. And so expecting that they're going to start reading it, I don't. But it's not about changing everyone's mind all the time. It's not about getting the climate change deniers to suddenly start caring about science or whatever. It's multiple things. It's the climate change denier, all they're going to do is create nonsense and try and confuse things. The advantage of this system is that every time they do it, and the debunking is written, or the critique, the thing that puts it in context, right? Because the other thing, this is so blunt that what is a critique? It's like it could be anything. It's not just this is wrong for these reasons. Sometimes they say this isn't even wrong. This is a red herring, whatever. So sometimes the critique can just put it into the context that you really wish it would be put into, and then once it's done, it's done. This is one of the problems with the web, is these bad arguments, the red herrings, the you know, if humans evolved from monkeys, why are monkeys still here? Arguments that have been coming up thousands of times over the past 50 years. How many times do we need to write critiques to them? Can't we just go, oh, this argument again, where's the rebuttal critique of this argument generally speaking? And we can just connect it straight away. So we can finally organize the arguments in a way where once critiqued, done. So the bad arguments can be addressed. The people that aren't engaging with them aren't going to engage. They don't matter. But those same people may care.
But they do matter. That's what I'm saying. I totally agree with what you're doing. I think it's a really valuable tool, but it's not addressed. I mean, you know, the picture of the entire population and all of the knowledge. I mean, you're just not dealing with that intersection as much as you're claiming to. Right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, draw down the claim. It's a valuable tool. It's not the entirety of the problem.
The way that I address. So I say they don't matter. What I mean is, like, if you want to convince someone that God doesn't exist, you don't go and find the Pope. Like, you pick your battles. Yes, they matter because they are the ones that are fighting their fight, and they're the ones that are having the influence, right? The people that believe absolute nonsense and strongly believe it. I say they don't matter as in the fact that you can't change their minds doesn't matter to the system, because the system's not trying to change their minds, because it's a waste of... Like, it kind of is, but, like, again, the system is just representing what humans do anyway, right? So this is our ability to change their minds is independent of the system, whatever. How this works to improve the problem that you're worried about is on the next generation. Because the next generation will be growing up in a fundamentalist household, and they only ever get one source of information. But now when they go to the web, they can't avoid the fact that they're finding out that people disagree with that one source of information. So your parents would go on and put you onto a website, and that website's telling you about someone critiquing it. Lots of people may be upset with that in certain cases, but the ability to influence the next generation to not believe things dogmatically, to doubt what they're being told by authority, and to critique everything they're being told, that's where real change will happen. Changing the minds of the Pope is hard. Making the next generation critical thinkers is easy comparatively.
Wow, Joy, you had your hand up before.
I didn't, but I can
Oh,
add
you
something.
did?
Just a comment on what you were saying earlier about politics and critical literacy. We did have a critical literacy curriculum in New South Wales, and it was the politics that got in the way eventually. And they, one of those sets of literacy was probably in the 1990s, I think they canned it. Before it got too far, but it was a very good curriculum.
Like, it's a little bit conspiratorial, but the ruling class don't want critical thinking public.
No, they didn't. No. Made kids cynical, they said.
Yeah. So which goes back to the politics side of things. It's like, it's ideal if we can just implement a system where everyone agrees, okay, we're going to do the right thing. The world just rarely works that way.
It doesn't.
Jump in, get
Oh, I just wanted to say it does challenge me a bit that you don't think that critical thinking needs to be taught.
No, I know. Again, the gun to the knife fight thing. I'm not saying that knives aren't good for killing people, but when we're dealing with the problem of a nuke, bringing a knife, teaching people, so doing the education is important. Do it, love it. I'm all for education. I want to see philosophy taught in primary schools. That's one of the things I really care about. But it's not going to solve this problem.
Well, but that's like saying, okay, so they might say it's not sufficient, but it doesn't mean it isn't necessary. I mean, it seems to me that it's necessary because, the whole thing you've been talking about is I agree. I think it's really interesting. But there's a lot of things on my computer screen that I don't click on. Yeah. Lots of little buttons all over the place. I don't know what they are because I never clicked on, never found out. So
yeah.
that other little button, I don't mean like links on websites. I mean button on my browser, right? So you said, oh, if you click on that, then this comes down. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So there's no way I would know that. That I wouldn't know it. I wouldn't be motivated to click on it.
And again, that's it. It's all about the next generation in the end.
Okay, it's fine, but I just don't feel that. So I think that both of these things are necessary, but neither of them is sufficient, and so that's kind of the crucial thing. So I don't think you can say. I think what you're doing is fantastic, but I wouldn't advise downplaying the need for actually trying to promote critical thinking. So at the start, when you said this thing about teaching literacy to kids. I wasn't at all teaching them don't trust that website. What I would have assumed you would do if you were teaching literacy to kids was precisely teaching critical thinking, and
that's what I meant by it.
Well, and I think you can define it. I don't see why you should shy away from defining what it is. I mean, have a go. It's basically saying don't automatically believe what you're told if you don't have evidence for it.
If I define it, someone will call out the definition and tell me I'm wrong.
Question it and go and check for evidence, get a second opinion and see, etc. And so that's, just something as simple as that. You can tell it to someone, but they're not. Doesn't mean they're going to take it on board.
That's
so
it. Why I'm not at all. Sorry, I'm really not against teaching critical thinking in schools. I do think it is an important thing to do. But I don't know if it's necessary or not. I fundamentally agree with you. I don't know if it's necessary or not, though, because do we do it now? Like, how much do schools teach critical thinking? It's a hard thing to teach. I actually went to a conference on critical thinking where the conference was teaching teachers how to teach critical thinking. And even in that, I was like, this was confusing crap out of me. Teaching critical thinking is a really hard thing to do as a structured lesson. This is why this excites me, because... And this is also why, so you're nodding when I said it before, I don't need to define what critical thinking is, because what this does is creates a culture where it's just critique everything. And anyone that lives in that culture will then take it, we copy our peers, we copy what's done around us. We don't need to define critical thinking. We don't need to teach them how to do critical thinking. They just start copying. It's like, I'm reading an article and I read the critique, I do that 100 times, and then I read another article that has the same mistakes in it that I saw the other 100 times. I'm like, oh, I know how to critique this now. Is that critical thinking? I don't know the strict definition of it, and I don't need to. They're doing something which has a positive impact on their media literacy and how they read things and contextualize things.
As long as you know how to motivate them to pay attention to that critique.
And so going to the next generation thing, you don't know where that button is? Once this is implemented, enough people will know about it through basic media, through the implementation of Facebook, whatever, that inevitably the education system, the teachers will just go, when you're doing research, make sure you click on this button. Kids will be shown it at school because it'll help their education. The next generation will grow up with it, the same as the current generation has grown up knowing that, oh, I don't know the answer to this question, I'll just Google it. Like how many times my mum asks me things, oh, what's the answer to this? I'm like, just Google it. She just doesn't think of it because it wasn't there for most of her life.
Can I just make 2 quick points? One, fake news has been around since forever. It's just that I think we should thank the dawn for talking about fake news, because it's made us a bit more critical. Second point is the second point is that I think we have a great idea, but I think it can be even greater if there is a database of all the studies that these comments rely on. So if there is a website that lists all the academic work that's been done, and people who make contentions on your website make references to those, I think people are basically critical in their thinking. It's just they're really jaded because of all the noise they're getting on the net. And a lot of memes.
A lot of that.
You know? So if you allow them to go to the source material and read the work that's been done and make their own judgment on how good the studies are.
That sort of thing will be built into the critiques themselves. So this system manages almost nothing. All it does is this critiques that. And so the person that writes the critique, if they write a decent enough critique, they will have references in their article. But the problem with that is whether the best critique gets to the top or not. Because we have two issues here. The best, most valid, most evidence-based response, and the response that appeals to the most people. Now this is not about, in reality, this is not trying to replace peer review or replace knowledge. This is trying to replace the public interface to information, which is a very different thing. Most people are ignorant of most things, and they want to read the article that's easy to read and persuasive. And so this is potentially one of the flaws, is they may be persuaded to crap. I think that the net gain will outweigh the few people that are persuaded the wrong way, because equally, as much as people on the side of error can be persuasive, people on the side of truth can be persuasive too. And the difference that discerns the two is one has evidence and one doesn't. So I think the net sum will play out in the end.
My impression is that academic work is generally not available to the public.
Scholar.google.com.
So, but generally not, you know.
Yeah, it's because people don't. This is sort of the point actually. Is people don't go after it. People can't read it.
People aren't taught to go after it, you know. So that would be the first step to critical thinking.
Yeah, so I work in publishing and edit a lot of academic work, and the evidence might be as compelling as possible, but it's often not written for a general audience. And I think your point being that if it's persuasive,
I just recognise you.
if it's persuasive, it will get both the fact and the feeling in the same place. And as much as we hate to talk about them, emotions really are how people connect to truth, or ideas, or truths. So. In that space, you need to bring the two together to be effective.
Exactly.
And can I say something also? This really speaks to me because I don't think it's obviously not a content generation kind of, that's not the point. So it will still rely on academic work. It will still rely on quality journalism, because those are the people at the forefront of communicating things that are happening in the world. But it is a way of breaking down silos and making people open to a difference of opinion, which I think is where the critical part of communicating across divides. And so I don't think it's about replacing quality journalism or critical thinking in schools. That's all a necessary part of it, but I think it's a really relevant kind of idea, because I don't trust any particular journalist, I don't trust any particular newspaper, but I also do trust the kind of community of the internet, and that's where entertainment is. That is where
a number of times
news is. I
go to
trust
Reddit,
the population.
something gets shared on Reddit, you go to the comments straight away to see what people have said about the article, because that's more informative than the article itself.
And that's how I go about. Yeah.
Yes, but we have something like 50, probably more, 70, 80 years of media studies that are not acknowledged at all here. So we spend time and resources trying to compare media systems around the world. And we have great important studies done at the international level that show, for example, that the level of public knowledge in countries where you have really incredibly resourceful public service media, like, for example, Finland, Denmark, the level of public knowledge of people is much higher than countries like Australia, countries like the US, countries like even the UK, And this is, academic knowledge that we developed in something like, 70 years. So, for me, just to say that, we have millions of rebuttals and, whatever, we just trust the internet community because, they will be coming up with incredibly quality, forms of rebuttal without acknowledging that, we have these histories of reports and studies that tell us, look, the level of public knowledge of people, working class, and I'm not talking about, class divisions, because the reality is that even with environmentalism, when I look at Australia, and I've been doing a lot of, media representation studies at the moment of environmentalism in Australia, I got shocked because I saw that the first thing is to represent the environmental activists as people sipping latte in Surrey Hills. Yeah. And I never saw anything like that, even coming from Southern Europe, really. Like, people just sipping latte in Surrey Hills, like after studies done that show that the environmentalism of the poor is what matters, because actually it's the poorest countries in the world, the one that are most affected. Mm-hmm. And once we explain this to people through absolutely trustworthy institutions, media institutions, so quality journalism, media institutions that do this and they approach and they connect to the public, they understand and they are all on board. And so this is what we need to achieve. But just to say that we can trust, the internet community and their rebuttals without, acknowledging that there is a problem of professionalism, there is a problem of building trust, there is a problem of acknowledging, the relevance of some institutions instead of others, would be just to just agree with studies that, believe in the democratization of the internet just because internet doesn't need any form of regulation because it's just setting us free. And this has been demonstrated to be absolutely wrong since the 90s. Mm. And now we are, in a situation where internet is not an instrument of democracy, but of control and repression and surveillance, most of all. Yeah. So, I don't see how we can just say, well, rebuttals, yes, great.
But they'll be based on those institutions, right?
Sorry?
But the rebuttals will be based on, the whole rebuttal system is just channeling to, for example, a Nature article or a science article. Like, it will still be foundationally based on...
No, it's not from there. It's not very clear, where the rebuttals will be coming from.
From the web. Any web page. Any web page.
Exactly. So that's precisely my point. So it's, again, more misinformation. It's like having a panel, a Q&A, where they invite 2 climate deniers and 2, scientists.
No, it's not.
Because,
not at all. John, you've been waiting.
I think here's a constructive remark. I think it would be good for you not to dodge what is critical thinking question. I really think in your promotion and the online text, you really need to say something more about this. And I've spent a good deal of my life thinking about this.
Do you have an answer? Can you give me the right answer and I'll say it?
No, there isn't a right answer, and that's the point. And you shouldn't dodge it. There is a side of you, it came out at the end, where actually you think that evidence, paying attention to evidence and correspondence with what is said to the evidence out there counts as critical thinking. The point is, this is only one way of thinking about critical thinking. The history of critical thinking is a history of disagreement about what is critical thinking. So Plato's understanding of critical thinking is not that of the pre-Socratic, and it's not that of Luther in the Protestant Reformation. And I could go on. It's not Marx. Yeah. So,
and I'm not going to disagree with any of
it. So the first thing to say is that when you're teaching critical thinking at the very earliest level, with your kids, classroom, or any situation, public life, adults, encouraging awareness that what counts as critical thinking is itself controversial is the first step. And the second, I think, much more pertinent, is to ask what are the real dangers of this moment. And the real dangers, we've been discussing this around this table for a few months. Bullshit, technically, because its function is to extinguish critical thinking. It just wants you to relax and to get on with life without thinking about anything. Lying, because it's dissembling that aims to throw you off the trail and to suspend critical thinking. And I would say, we didn't discuss it much around this table, what used to be called ideology, it's become a valorized term, but big grand narratives like neoliberalism, Trumpism is possibly one being born now, socialism, you know, these were whole ways of thinking that promoted, they claim, critical thinking, but actually were designed to extinguish. So rather than saying, oh, I don't know what critical thinking is, or it's a matter of opinion, but then later slipping in, you know, that it's actually evidence-based, I think
but that's it, like my opinion on it doesn't matter.
toughen it up by saying that actually there's a history of what counts as critical thinking, and critical thinking involves becoming aware of that. However, in an elementary way, the way a Christian thinks or a Muslim thinks about critical thinking is not the way that Darwin thought. But also paying attention to what really is the threats, you know, the threats of our times. And I think the bullshit and the lying and the ideologies, all of those have the effect of gaslighting. They want to gaslight people to destroy exactly what you're advocating. And I think you just need to be tougher about that, and you need to say something like that, you know, in your own way. That's a comment.
Yeah. Actually, so what you said made me think of, there is one sort of limitation with the way the system, as I present it now, I do think of this as the first step. Mm-hmm. It will get more refined over time. And one of the limitations with this, as it currently stands, is that it is such a blunt instrument that one article leads to one critique. And the reality is one article could have different critiques from different angles. From, you know, this is not even wrong, to, well, these arguments are broken down in this way, to, well, your metaphysics is fundamentally flawed. You know, like, there's so many different ways to approach a critique. And it's one of the things that I sort of hope will play out over time when, you know, when this becomes globally used and well developed, then we can have lots of money thrown at it and have someone figure out how to do this, because I don't know the answer yet, to be able to sort of categorize the critiques so that you're not just voting amongst all the critiques for the best, but it's like, well, this is taking that angle and these ones are taking, and we can categorize them and then get the best metaphysical one, the best blah one, or whatever. That's, you know, that's a refinement that's well beyond the scope of current systems.
Again, I think that the privatized, you know, the privatism built into the current version of what you have is worrying, because actually the most sophisticated platforms that are dealing with the same problem at times have a strong sense that the promotion of their algorithm, I mean their proposals, in public is what has. And
open access, open source.
I worry that this is all done, you know, with handsets and at terminals, privately, without discussing with anybody else, without having. That's the kind of model, and this is the depoliticization of it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly not the goal. I'm very much attempting to make it, as I said, a public good, open access, open source, non-profit organisation, consortium, with as full transparency as possible. In fact,
therefore, your narrative of what counts as critical thinking is really important too. It's really
see why.
And saying you don't know what it is doesn't help the case.
The platform would appear to be able to take on all different kinds of critical thinking, and that's the idea. So to have one person's opinion of what critical thinking is, to me, seems to go against what it's trying to say, which is all the, you know, in whatever fashion you may want to make this argument, the general consensus is these ones will be effective on this account at this time, and it's that flexibility to be able to take on different kinds of critical thinking. That seems to be the point to me.
I mean, maybe there's a distraction in this time if that's, you know, if you're uncomfortable with it or something. You know, it seems to me that, I mean, you've used the word critique, or, you know, maybe more than one side to a story might be another way to put it. It seems to me the essence is that you're saying to people, you know, here's a claim someone's making. Other people have questioned that claim, or other people have said that's not correct, or something like this. And all you're saying is that people should find out what that other person is saying before they decide whether they want to believe what this first person is saying, right? That's kind of the essence of what you're talking about. And
so I used to have, it was originally called Rebuttal, the system we developed, and it was focusing on rebuttals. Right. But I found people got too confused saying, oh, this isn't a rebuttal, and I'm like, yeah, but it critiques it in some capacity. And like, so I started using the word critique to broaden the things that are covered, because it doesn't have to be a formulated rebuttal. Like an example one came up with, this was kind of a funny one, it was an advert saying, did you know that like 85 million people in the UK suffer from back pain? And they linked to the Wikipedia article in the UK, which had 65 million population. You know, it's not a rebuttal. It's just, if you look at it, yeah, that's lying, right? It's just obvious. So
it's a response.
Yeah.
The word response is a more.
But it has to be critical. It has to be contrary in some capacity. And so maybe contrary is the better term. But
a lot of those people aren't going to be.
That's even more dangerous.
Yeah.
They're going to be responding. So that they're going to make up an article to respond, but you're calling it a critique.
So but the thing is you can respond and go, hey, this person wrote this article and it was awesome, it was amazing, and I agree with all these points. That will be removed from the system. It's inappropriate to the system.
And I guess it's going to be a spectrum of people who are using the platform for curious engagement with different opinions, which is kind of the ideal, versus people who are trolling for, and like hopefully the thing will just, but will just go down. But I think that the people who are going to access this are people who are curious about the alternates anyway, so it's already going to like slew out a lot of the population, but that's okay for the people who are interested. It's going to allow them to access diverging opinions to their own, which is a huge problem with the whole fake news thing and the, you know, echo chambers and siloization of different media outlets, and I think that gets to the heart of it, and it's really important.
You mentioned the voting, just very quickly, the up and down, and you said the end game will kind of work, you know, it kind of plays itself out, the system, in terms of voting. Since voting will be so critical for the system, how does it fundamentally differ to, say, Facebook's likes or, you know, the number of shares that Donald Trump got?
Purely by the relationship. Yeah. So by the fact that all we're doing is claim, critique, connection, and the voting is purely deciding what the best critique is. So when you like something on Facebook, that doesn't change how much, well, it merely influences how much your network sees that article or something. So it's sort of an absolute visibility of it over a discrete time frame. Same with Reddit. You vote up an article, you're moving it up the front page over a period of time. Most voting is like that. It's like deciding that this is the best, this is true, this is something that people should see now.
I feel like something that's another way to kind of frame this would be to appeal. You said evidence, and then sort of critique and that sort of thing. I mean, another way of framing it that captures this difference with likes and stuff is that what you're really interested in is reasons to agree or not to agree, or reasons to believe or not to believe the thing that's being put forward, right? So a critique, in a way, is either saying that the reasons given in the article don't hold, they're not true, or here are some other reasons. Here are some reasons not given in the article why you shouldn't believe that. So I mean that's another way of framing what argumentation is all about, right? It's giving reasons to accept or not accept a certain sort of assertion. So that might be another way to kind of frame it, that you're not just saying I agree with it, I like it or whatever, but you're saying here are some reasons to not agree with it, and the critical thinking might be to say don't believe it unless you know what your reasons are for believing it, and unless you've discounted reasons other people have given to not believe it. That would be another way of framing it. Anyway. We one more question because we're out of time.
So I picked you up that you said you were looking to crowdfund this.
The crowdfunding would be to get enough money to get the branding done and develop a website, simple landing page, register the organisation, get a lawyer to make sure that we're setting it up correctly, basic stuff like that, so that I can then go and fundraise. I think the whole thing could be done for about $300,000 US, and that's just insanely cheap compared to what everyone else is doing.
Crowdfunding can introduce political vulnerability, in that he who saves, he who pays saves. So, for example, you were approached by, I'm presuming you would not be supported by the sound of it, highly conservative organisations that offer you funding for this. How would you critically think through the process whether you were going to actually accept that or not? So the whole crowdfunding model was something like this, introduces sometimes a political vulnerability because it's then may possibly attempt to influence content.
The crowdfunding is the lesser threat on that case then, because the next step, the $250,000 will probably come from hopefully a philanthropic organisation like the Shuttleworth Foundation or something would be great.
That, but it's just a bit.
But then after that, I expect the money will mostly come from Facebook and Google, because they will be the ones that will be using it more than anyone. This is solving their problem at the moment, which is no one trusts, people are worried about them not doing something, and this does something. And so, yeah, probably 90% of the funding will continue to come from them, I hope. So, you know, the political question is very real there, but it's got to get funded one way or another.
Okay, so our allotted time is up, but we still have coffee and fruit and brownies, and we have the room for another half hour, so don't run off. Shane is still here to talk with us, so thank you very much for very stimulating.
Thank you.